there, it's Pastor Rob here. Welcome to the Cutting Room Floor. This is a segment where I get to go a little bit deeper into some of the material from a recent message here at Sunny Slope. We get to kind of unpack something that maybe there's just not enough time to do justice to it in a message, and so we do it here. We kind of follow rabbit trails and engage in stuff that we might not otherwise get to engage in. We are this past week we looked at a story in which Paul goes to the city of Athens and he engages some of the cultural elites. And one of the things that he does when he's in Athens is he quotes from the poets and the philosophers that were well known to secular philosophers and outside of the Jewish community. In other words, Paul learns to converse with the ideas that are represented in the broader culture. And one of the things that I challenge us in is that as Christians, we need to learn to do this. We need to learn to become conversant with our culture. And what that means is that when we watch movies or read books or listen to music, we learn to be more than just consumers of those cultural products, but we actually learn to listen with discernment. We learn to try to peel back the layers and pay attention to the meaning underneath the medium. And I did not have time. Time would, there's too much to this to really get into in a message. It probably could be a whole talk all on its own. But I want to suggest that there are 5 questions that we can ask that help us to discern and identify the worldview behind the cultural products that we often take in. And so what I want to do, I want to take you through those, and then I want to give you some examples of books or music or movies that maybe illustrate each of these different questions. So when you're watching a movie, when you're watching, the latest series on Netflix, or when you're listening to music or podcasts or whatever, consider asking these questions. And I think hopefully they're simple enough that you can at least remember what they are. The first question is the question of identity. What does this movie or what does this TV show say about who we are as human beings? And then kind of connected with that, where did we come from? What is our origin? Are we simply the product of a long process of evolution? Are we created with design and purpose in mind? What is our nature? What does it mean to be human? What does it mean to love, to be vulnerable? What are human beings like? Are we evil? Are we are we basically good people? What does it mean to be human? So if you've seen the movie Ratatouille, that's a classic movie. I think it's a Disney Pixar movie, if I remember right, which wrestles with that question of identity. What does it mean to be given gifts and abilities? How do you flourish with those gifts and abilities? The movie Amadeus is a little bit older. That's another favorite of mine. I actually watched that. It's one of my probably top 5 favorite movies that I watched this year. And it wrestles with that question of what does it mean to have gifts and abilities? Where do they come from? How do we use them? How do we find meaning and identity, or how do we find meaning and purpose in our identity? And then another movie that I just watched a few weeks ago was the movie Clueless, which is from the mid-90s. And it wrestles with that question of how do you fit in? How do you craft an identity? What does it mean to find acceptance in this world? So that's the first question. It's a question of identity. Who are we? And then the second question is, what's wrong? What's the problem? What does this movie or TV show or podcast or whatever, what does it say about what is wrong about either myself or as human beings, or what does it describe for us about what's wrong with the world? What does this cultural artifact point to as the source of all of the problems? Every worldview has to come to grips somehow with the question of how do we explain the reason for the way that the world is? Is Is it bad social structures? Is it bad human beings? Is it a few bad apples? Is it something wrong with all of us, or what? Um, Solzhenitsyn writes about this, of course, in Gulag Archipelago, and he writes about his own reflections. Or other books, Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. I just finished reading the book East of Eden, and that's probably the #1 book that I've read this year. It is a fantastic read by John Steinbeck. It first came out in, I think, 1952, and it tells the story of really 3 generations of 2 different families, and it unpacks something about the nature of human evil of evil in human beings, but also the way that good and evil are all kind of intertwined. The song "Strange Fruit" is another song. It's by Nina Simone, and if you like jazz, or maybe this is actually more like blues, this is a haunting song. You can listen to it on Spotify. I believe it was also recorded by Billie Holiday, but this song, when you listen to it, it sends a shiver down your spine because of the way it depicts the power of racial violence in the South in the 1950s. I think it was in the 1950s. It might be a little bit earlier. And in any case, the way that song illustrates human brokenness is powerful and worth listening. So if you've got the question of identity, who are we? Where did we come from? What's our origin? We've got the question of what's wrong? What's the problem? The third question is, what's the solution? What does this piece of cultural artifact, what does it tell us about how to fix the problem in the world? Do we need to fix social structures? Do we need to change human behavior? Do we need to fight and go to war against evil? What do we need to do to fix it? And how do we go about solving it? There's 2. One of them is a movie. One of them is a play. I've seen this movie a handful of times, and it's every bit as good every time I watch it. And that's Clint Eastwood's Gran Torino. That is a powerful story that illustrates both the problem in this world and the effects of human sinfulness and brokenness and anger and bitterness and all of those things. Racism is playing into that. But it also portrays the solution. It also makes a compelling case for the solution to fix those problems. And then The Sign of Jonah is another one. That's a story. It's a play that's set in the wake of the Second World War that tries to come to grips with how could a nation get to the point where it elected the Nazi Party and committed all these horrible atrocities. But then it also proposes a solution to that. And in some ways, the solution proposed there is the sort of the opposite of what's outlined in Gran Torino. I won't spoil it for you, but it's a powerful solution that is, it illustrates one way of solving the problem of evil in the world. And then the question of destiny, which is the question, so where are we going then as human beings? We've looked at the question of identity. Who are we? We've looked at the question of brokenness. What's wrong? We've looked at the question of how do we fix it? But then there's the question of, okay, so where are we headed as a human race, as a world, as an individual? What is our ultimate purpose? Are we simply destined to return to the ground and we're organic matter for the rest of eternity? Is it that we die and then there's nothing left? Is everybody headed sort of for this great eternal bliss in the sky? Is it more aligned with the Christian value? Is it what? And sort of related to that is the question of, well, what is it that will bring us the happiness that we're looking for? What is it that will satisfy the longings of the human condition? So there's 3 that I've seen on this. The first is the movie Gladiator. That's a movie, I think that was a Ridley Scott movie. It came out, I think, in the year 2000. And it really paints this picture of what is the good life. What does it mean to have a good and thriving and flourishing community. Community actually being the Roman Empire, and then it contrasts that or compares that with what the word was Elysium, which is the Latin word for that, kind of gets at the idea of the afterlife. And so it's kind of holding up this idea of what is the good life after all? What is it that we're really longing for, and how do we obtain that? How do we achieve that? Terminator 2 was a movie that came out in the early 90s, I think, and maybe 1990. And that is a movie that portrays this very dark vision of the future. It's a very, haunting portrayal of what is to come. And then it raises the question: is that our destiny, or is there a way sort of around that? And maybe that kind of reminds me of another one. I didn't think of this one until just now, but Forrest Gump is another one, right? Because the whole theme of that movie is about the feather that's floating, and it's that tension between fatalism, where just sort of everything is destined, like Lieutenant Dan was believing, or are we just kind of floating around and there's no ultimate purpose, or is it something in between? And so the movie kind of holds that up. 1984 is a book, and I think it was made into movies as well, but I'm thinking of the book, and the way that book ends stays with me. It's a tragic ending, really, but it kind of wrestles with that idea of what is the ultimate destiny for human beings. Where are we actually headed? So identity, problem, solution, destiny. One final question, and that's the question of morality. Not just, and there's sort of maybe two layers to that. The most obvious layer is the question of what is right and wrong. How does this movie or book or TV show make a case for what is acceptable and what is not? What is morally acceptable and what is not? But I think there's another deeper layer that is maybe worth paying more attention to, and that is not just what is right and wrong, but how do you determine right and wrong? Like how do you align the compass of morality? And so is morality determined on human emotion? Is it sort of a utilitarian idea of whatever ultimately delivers the most good? Is it is there how do you sort that all out? So the movie Oppenheimer was an Academy Award-winning movie. Came out last year, and it's a reasonably true story about how the atomic bomb was developed, and it wrestles with those questions of ethical dilemmas and right and wrong. Is it right or wrong to produce this weapon of mass destruction? Road to Perdition was a movie. I'd watched it once quite a long time ago. I didn't really get it. Or I shouldn't say I didn't get it. I didn't enjoy it as much the first time, but then when I rewatched it at the beginning of this year, I found it to be a very compelling, very powerful movie that portrays the tension between good and evil, and it nuances it so that because evil and good often there's even nuance within that, and so the movie I think powerfully captures that. The movie, the Godfather series, I have yet to watch 2 and 3, but I recently watched Godfather, the first one, and what a powerful story that illustrates this complexity between good and evil. It shows us that as much as we like to think evil are just the people who are really, really, really monsters, it shows how even the mafia don he's got a family and he cares for his children, and so it helps us to see that and think through that a little more. And then of course, like a book like Screwtape Letters is a classic sort of, it's not a parody, but it's kind of this written in a sort of ironic way that helps us to think through what is evil after all, and why is it evil. So all of these are questions that you can and should ask. The question of origin, what's wrong, what's the solution, what is our destiny, and what is morality. Those are all questions to keep as a framework in your mind. And when you watch movies or TV shows, or when you listen to music, ask what is this cultural product. How is this cultural product answering those questions? And then you compare that with how is the Christian message alike or different? Where is their overlap? One final word, of course, Christians need to use discernment. I mean, not every movie is going to be worthy of our attention, and that's not always easy to know exactly where that line is. It's going to look different, I think, for some Christians as opposed to others, but it's still a question we have to be asking. But then when we decide that it's worth watching or listening to or reading, ask these questions to help you become a good discerner, help you become conversant with our culture, to help you engage the Christian message with the world around us. Thanks for watching, as always. We'll see you next time on the